Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. This week's show is about the future, how to build it, what's in store, and what challenges we might face as technological innovation continues its march. In the second half of our show, futurist and best-selling author and analyst Sonia Arison shares her insights and forecasts on what society might be like when life expectancy soars past 150. Up first, we have noted venture capitalist, entrepreneur, teacher, and author Peter Thiel, whose book 0 to 1 Notes on Startups, or How to Build the Future, was just released. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Peter, your book grew out of a set of notes you developed for an entrepreneurship class you were teaching at Stanford. Tell us about that.
I've been working both as an entrepreneur and an investor in technology companies for the last 16, 17 years in Silicon Valley. And I thought that I would try to distill everything that I knew into a single class that I taught. And so when you teach a class, you often learn a lot more as a teacher than as a student, especially when you teach it the first time. It's a forcing function that forces you to figure out the right ways to present a lot of ideas and lay them out to students. And one of the students in the class took these notes. They went on the internet. They went viral. Hundreds of thousands of people read them. And we thought that it would be great to take it, formalize it, turn it into a real book, and get it to a larger audience. And so 0 to 1 is the book that we've written. It is a distillation of my ideas about startups, the future, and just about everything else.
And why 0 to 1? What's the message in the title?
One of the things I distinguish in the book is different type forms of progress or growth. And there's horizontal progress, where you copy things that work, and you take something that works and you make more of it. And that's going from 1 to N. You have a typewriter and you make 100 typewriters. And globalization is the dominant form of horizontal progress in the 21st century. And then there is vertical progress, where you do new things. You create new things, and that's where you're going from 0 to 1. And so you go from 0 word processors to the first word processor. So when you take a typewriter and you build a word processor, when you build the first one, that's something where you're going from 0 to 1. And such vertical progress is often manifest in technology. It is my view that technology is the key towards better living standards in the long run for all of humanity. It's been the story since the Enlightenment in the Western world. It's been a story of rapid technological progress, and this has been a key driver. And that's something that I think there's been some slowdown in technology in the last 40 years, and I think it's incumbent on us to find ways to get back to the future, to building new things, leaving a far better world for the generations ahead of us.
But every era seems to have its paradigm. I remember back when I started in the venture capital business, there was a book by Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen called Innovators Dilemma that captured everyone's imagination. He talked a lot about disruptive technologies, using disruptive change to unseat large entrenched competitors. Has that paradigm run its course?
I think the paradigm still has a lot of truth to it, although I would argue the Christensen book was written primarily from the perspective of large companies that were facing small challengers and what should they do about them. And so it actually got turned around into a book for startups, but I think the initial intention Christensen had was this was a challenge for large companies and that they often underestimated these smaller businesses. I would say that my basic paradigm is that you want to do things that are new and where you're competing as little as possible with existing players.
The real leap.
You do not want to define yourself by what already exists, by doing a slightly better version of something that already exists or slightly cheaper version, but instead that it's worth exploring doing things that do not yet exist, that are fresh and strange and new.
You make some provocative statements about what you call monopoly capitalism. Can you compare and contrast that with government-mandated monopolies like the old Bell system? I mean, I was there at the end, and it was hardly a paragon of innovation.
Yes. So let me say something about monopoly capitalism and then something about good and bad monopolies. So I think capitalism, one of the questions I ask early on in my book is, tell me something that's true that very few people agree with you on. And I think this is always a very provocative question. And I have many different answers to this question in the course of my book. One big answer is that most people think capitalism and competition are synonyms, and I believe they are antonyms. I think that capitalism and competition are very far removed from one another. A capitalist is someone who's in the business of accumulating capital. A world of perfect competition is a world where all the capital is competed away. So
all the value goes
Google,
to the customer.
It all goes to the customer. So, for example, Google is a very capitalist company, but it has had no real competition in its core search business since 2002, when it definitively distanced itself from Yahoo and Microsoft. By contrast, the restaurant business in the city of San Francisco is insanely competitive, but very non-capitalistic. You will never make any money. And so I think capitalism and competition are very different. The paradigm that I set out is creating a monopoly-like business, I believe, is the key to having a very profitable business.
In the sense of a winner-take-all when you say monopoly.
Where you're doing something that no one else is doing, you are by definition a monopoly. And a good monopoly is one where you've actually created something new. And so we actually protect good monopolies through intellectual property and patents, or maybe business models. And so when Apple came up with the iPhone, it was not artificial scarcity that it created, but it was a new form of plenty, because consumers finally had a smartphone that just worked. And so in a dynamic world, there is no problem with monopolies, because you're creating new things, and some of the value of what you create gets captured by the creator, and some of it gets captured by the consumer in the form of consumer surplus. And monopolies become a problem in a world that is static and unchanging, and that's where it's sort of like the Monopoly board game, where you can only shuffle the properties around. It's all fixed, and the monopolist is just a rent collector.
That's what the Bell system felt like by the time I left.
And so my basic dichotomy is, I think bad monopolies are ones that are backed by the force of the government. And so when you have government-backed industries, that's where you have monopolies that can last for decades or even centuries and extract unfair profits in a fundamentally static world. I think that as long as there's room for innovation, private sector monopolies are very profitable, but they are typically not, they typically do not endure forever. People come up with new things, and this is what happened with IBM. It's what happened with Microsoft in the 90s. And I think it will happen even with a company as seemingly dominant as Google today.
When you say people should look for things that others don't know, your book asks, why aren't people looking for secrets? What do you mean by a secret?
A secret is something that you can figure out but is hard to figure out. And I distinguish that from a convention, which is something everybody already knows to be true, or maybe, on the other hand, a mystery, something that's impossible to figure out. And we live in a world in which people have come to believe that there are very few secrets, that everything is either can be known by a 12-year-old or even an Einstein cannot understand it. And so we have all sorts of forms of fundamentalist thinking that say that there are no secrets. So, for example, religious fundamentalism says that even a 12-year-old knows that God loves you, but an Einstein could not know more about God than a 12-year-old. There's nothing in between. Or environmental fundamentalism tells us that even a 12-year-old knows that you should be nice to nature, but an Einstein would not know any more, because nature always knows more than any human being would. And so fundamentalist modes of thought are ones in which we already know everything. There's nothing hidden left to discover. And so this idea that there are actually a lot of secrets, there are a lot of hidden things that are hard to find, but if we apply ourselves to them, we can find them, is this sort of anti-fundamentalist mode of thinking that I think is worth exploring a lot. And I think there are all these subtle ways in our society that we've come to believe that it's very hard to find new things, that who are you to think of something new? Someone else has already thought of it. And if no one has thought of it, then it's going to be too hard for you to think of it. So you shouldn't even try.
That's like that old economist joke that says there can't possibly be a $100 bill on the sidewalk, because if there was one, someone else would have picked it up already.
Yes, well, market fundamentalism is the idea that everything's already priced into the market. And so a 12-year-old knows what the stock prices are because you can look them up in the newspaper, and even an Einstein can't figure out anything more. And yet I think all of the really valuable, really inspiring, really meaningful things that we do as human beings are in this intermediate hard zone. It's when we work at new things that people haven't fully thought through, haven't fully explored. That's where we make a difference in the world. And I'm optimistic in that I think there are many secrets left, and there are many secrets in technology and science that we could still discover. There's a pessimistic view that all the low-hanging fruit has been picked, and that we're now in this period where it's very hard to find things. And we have this secular stagnation and it's slow growth, and that this is just sort of a natural fact. I think that if we're in a period of stagnation, this is not a natural fact, but a cultural fact. It's a choice that we've made. The fruit was never low-hanging. It was always at an intermediate level, and you always had to reach for it to find it. And the problem is not that there's no fruit, but that we are no longer reaching.
Peter, the PayPal mafia, as we call it, is legendary in the tech business. Remind our listeners what that is, and tell us about what you call the mechanics of mafia.
The PayPal mafia is the group of people who started all these companies after PayPal was bought by eBay in 2002. It's a group of we had maybe 200 people who worked at the core PayPal business in 2002. And from that group, $7 billion plus companies have been started in the last decade. The first one was YouTube. There was Yelp, LinkedIn, Tesla, and SpaceX, a company called Yammer, and one that I helped start called Palantir Technologies. And so there was something in the DNA at PayPal where we had this very entrepreneurial culture some very tight friendships were formed, and you had sort of teams of people that came out of that started all these great new companies.
And you think you can turn that into a mechanism? You think other people can learn from that and reproduce it?
I think it's never possible to turn business into a simple mechanical formula. I think business. Every moment in business happens only once. So PayPal could be started at a certain moment in 1999 when people were just starting to use email, and there was a way to link money in email. If you try to do something like PayPal today in 2014, you would not be able to do this. I've sort of said that the next Bill Gates will not build an operating system. The next Larry Page won't make a search engine. And if you're copying these guys, you aren't learning from them. And what is critical is to appreciate what is unique and special in the circumstances in which you find yourself. And so while my book does not offer a formula for success, it offers sort of a series of exercises of how to think about the world and then of how to try to find value in strange and new places.
Your investment firm, Founders Fund, seems to really obsess about how special beginnings are in startups. You worry about the chemistry of the founding partners, the first few hires, the initial culture that they build. Tell us why that's so important.
The beginnings of things are very important because you have a certain amount of freedom at the beginning that you do not later have. I think it's true not just of startups, but of almost everything. It's like the United States. The founders of this country had a tremendous freedom at the Constitutional Convention. And today, we can no longer say that, California gets 2 senators, Alaska gets 2 senators. Right. California has 50 times the population of Alaska. And we can debate whether that's a feature or a bug, but it's not something we can change. And so there is something about the early start of a company, too, where you have this incredible freedom. You have freedom in terms of what you will do as a company. What kind of product are you going to build? What market are you going to go after? You have freedom in terms of what people you're going to hire, what roles the different people will have. You have freedom in terms of where you're going to locate your business. And once some of these initial decisions get made, they end up shaping a lot of the subsequent history. Some of my friends have jokingly referred to it as Thiel's law, that a startup messed up at its foundation can never be fixed, and it's because these founding moments are incredibly critical.
Peter, there's been a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth lately about robots taking all our jobs. What do you see as the proper relationship between man and machine?
I have a more optimistic view on this. I think that it's not a zero-sum game, and I think that humans and computers or humans and robots are fundamentally really different, that machines do things or computers do things very well that are very different from what people do well. Computers are good at crunching large amounts of data. Humans are good at making plans, having intentions, understanding the context of things. And so I see the story of computers and people as fundamentally a story of complementarity and not substitution. And the dominant paradigm seems to be one of substitution, whether you're either a Luddite who's scared that the computers will replace all the people, or whether you're sort of a weird futurist who's celebrating the replacement of people by computers. I think those positions are incorrect, because I think humans and computers are just really different. And I think we have this worry about substitution in globalization, where there's always a worry that Chinese and Indian workers will replace Americans. I'm in favor of globalization. I don't think we should resist it, but I think those concerns are not that misplaced, because people are not that different from one another, and so it's at least possible for someone to replace someone else if you pay them 1/10 as much or something like that. But because computers are so different from human beings, I think this worry about substitution is greatly exaggerated. One of the challenges the technology industry does face is that if you say, where has technology destroyed middle-class jobs? The one category where I think it has disrupted an industry that's really hurt a lot of middle-class jobs is in the old media industry, in journalism itself. And this is very unfortunate, because it's led to this incredible animus on the part of many people in the media against technology. And the people in the media generalize from their own experience to that of everybody else.
Interesting perspective. I never thought about it that way, but it makes a lot of sense. Peter, probably the biggest bust in the last decade of venture capital investing has been the rush to finance so-called clean tech companies. How did the industry get lured into that sinkhole, and what happened?
Well, I think there were many different things that went wrong. I actually think that whenever something goes wrong, it's often not the case that a single mistake was made, but perhaps that many different mistakes were made. In my book, I go through 7 different questions that companies need to get right, and I argue that the clean tech businesses, for the most part, got 0 out of 7. So it's not like they made one mistake, but they made 7 very different ones.
Yeah.
Just to mention 2 or 3 of them, one mistake was certainly that somehow the politics and the ideology distorted a lot of the thinking. There was no secret about clean tech. It was all conventional. You were in favor of it because other people were. There was nothing that differentiated one business from another. One of the other things that I think was quite strange about it was that the markets that people went after were incredibly big. And so when you go after $1 trillion market,
the energy market, right,
you will have that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. This means that you are likely to have a lot of hidden competitors, and there's sort of all these stories you're telling yourself that are not quite true. But I think that it is important for us to think really hard about why clean tech failed, and to try to learn from it. But it was this incredible psychosocial phenomenon where people did not think for themselves. Like all these bubbles, it was not possible to be too critical of clean tech. There were all these assumptions one could not question. One could not question climate change. One could not question the accounting. One could not question the technology. One could not question the political claim that the government was certainly going to subsidize all of it. So there were many different points where there was an intensity of the dogmatism that was quite scary, and I think that's sort of what scared us away from it.
So, Peter, you're rather famous for your disdain of our current education system. You've even started a scholarship program called 20 Under 20 that tries to get the best and the brightest to quit college and start businesses. Why is that?
Well, we have an education bubble today that's as pernicious as the tech bubble of the 90s or the housing bubble of the 2000s. There's over $1 trillion of student debt that students are amassing. And I think it's a terrible thing to amass this debt as a young person, because it limits the choices you can make. It limits the flexibility. It pushes young people to take better paying, but ultimately less interesting and less creative job opportunities. And so I do think there's sort of all these different things that have locked us in. Education has gone up in price at a faster rate than anything else in our society since 1980, faster than housing, faster than healthcare, and it is the paradigm of something that's non-technological. I've often said that technology means doing more with less. Education is anti-technological.
Yeah, it feels broken.
In that we're paying more for less, or maybe at best more for the same thing. If you look at a school, it's like still in the 19th century. And of course, the word education itself is an incredible abstraction. What we should be talking about is specific forms of education, maybe engineering or computer engineering even more. What are you learning? Why are you learning it? And when people hide behind this abstraction called education, all they're doing is refusing to think about the future for themselves. And I think that our society has become more and more tracked. The tracks are working less and less well. And in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, it is time for us to think again for ourselves and not to outsource our future to other people, even if they are professors or educational bureaucrats of one sort or another.
So, Peter, before the show, we were chatting about how I'm struggling with pessimism. I look around me, I see the economy going nowhere. I see our monetary system a mess. Our rate of innovation seems to be dropping. You're even famous for saying that you were hoping for flying cars and all we got was 140 characters. You have a whole chapter on pessimism and optimism. How do you see the world?
I think extremes of optimism and extremes of pessimism are both somewhat mistaken, and I think both of them lead you to doing nothing. If you think the future will be incredible,
no matter what,
if you think the future will be terrible, no matter what, in either case, you end up doing nothing. Now, it turns out that if you do nothing, it's likely the future will be worse. So there is a way in which thinking that the future is going to be fantastic, no matter what, is more delusional than that it will be terrible, no matter what. Because if you think it's terrible and you don't do anything, it's going to turn out to be terrible. Whereas if you think it's going to be fantastic and you don't do anything, it will not turn out to be fantastic. But I do think there's a lot of middle ground. As a libertarian, I always think the sort of the sensible position is one to say that individuals make a difference, choices make a difference, and therefore, the extremes of optimism and pessimism are generally wrong, and it's generally there's a lot of stuff we can point to that's bad, but it's also there are a lot of people who now realize things are bad, and so maybe the fact that we see things as being bad is the first step to fixing them. And certainly on the level of the tech industry and the startup context, unlike the political system, you don't have to convince 300 million people of something. You can convince half a dozen people. You can start a new business, and you can start on something to change the world. And so even though I share some of your political pessimism, there is always this technological opportunity that can happen on a smaller scale and yet can still transform the world on a larger scale. And so I think we have this race between technology and politics in our society. It's an open question who's going to come out ahead, but I'm going to pull hard for the tech team.
On that note, Peter, let me thank you for being on the show, and we'll check in again in the future to see how some of your portfolio companies are doing.
Bill, thanks for having me.
That was noted venture capitalist Peter Thiel here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Please send me your comments and feedback on this or any of our past shows. Just visit realclearradio.org and click on the Email Bill link. Real Clear Radio Hour is a partnership with Real Clear Politics, one of America's top political websites. For the latest news articles, election polls, and political commentary, I visit realclearpolitics.com every morning. Ahead, futurist Sonia Arnold, author of 100 Plus, How the Coming Age of Longevity Will Change Everything, discusses how this will likely come about and what it will all mean. Stay tuned.